Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Itiso bhagava araham samma sambuddho vichara samma sujato haridu anuttaro purisadhamma sarati sadareva anusana buddho bhagavati swakato bhagavata dhammo samyitiko bhagavito ekipasino obanaiko bhagavatam vedikaro viniduriti supatipanno bhagavato sammakasano Ujjupatipanno bhagavato sammakasano Nyayapatipanno bhagavato sammakasano Samicipatipanno bhagavato sammakasano Yadidam cattari purisayugani Atha purisamuddhara Esa bhagavato sammakasano Amuneyo Pamuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karanyo Anuttaram Punyakevam Lokasati.
Let us continue. Okay, very good. Made it up to page 2. Yay, us. We're doing great. And I'm going to, I'll read the next passage. Then those mendicants thought this Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions. He is capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief summary recital given by the Buddha. Let's go to him and ask him about this matter. Then those mendicants went to Mahakachana and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to one side. They told him what had happened and said, "May Venerable Mahakachana please explain this." "Reverence," Suppose there was a person in need of heartwood, and while wandering in search of heartwood, he'd come across a large tree standing with heartwood. But he'd pass over the roots and trunk, imagining that the heartwood should be sought in the branches and leaves. Such is the consequence for the venerables. Though you were face to face with the Buddha, you overlooked him, imagining that you should ask me about this matter, for he is the Buddha, the one who knows and sees. He is vision, he is knowledge. He is the manifestation of principle. He is the manifestation of divinity. He is the teacher, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, the bestower of freedom from death, the Lord of truth, the realized one. That was the time to approach the Buddha and ask about this matter. You should have remembered it in line with the Buddha's answer. And the monks replied, certainly he is the Buddha, the one who knows and sees. We should have asked him about this matter. Still, Venerable Mahakaccana is praised by the Buddha and esteemed by his sensible spiritual companions. You are capable of explaining in detail the meaning of this brief summary recital given by the Buddha. Please explain this if it's no trouble. Well then, reverends, listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. Yes, Reverend, they replied. Venerable Mahakaccana said this. Reverends, the Buddha gave this brief summary recital, then entered his dwelling without explaining the meaning in detail. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, just this is the end of the underlying tendencies to desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, the desire to be reborn, and ignorance. This is the end of the taking up of the rod and sword, the end of quarrels, arguments and disputes, of accusations, divisive speech, and and lies. This is where those bad, these bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of this summary recital. Okay, so far we have the setting and Mahakaccana's response, of course, very humble and very inspiring description of the Buddha, and then goes on to accept the challenge of explaining the teaching. Let us then continue with Mahakaccana's explanation, which is really the core of the sutta. The I consciousness arises dependent on the I and sights. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with respect to sights known by the I in the past, future, and present. Ear consciousness arises dependent on the ear and sounds. Nose consciousness arises dependent on the nose and smells. Tongue consciousness arises dependent on the tongue and tastes. Body consciousness arises dependent on the body and touches. Mind consciousness arises dependent on the mind and ideas. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. What you proliferate is the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. This occurs with respect to ideas known by the mind in the past, future, and present. So Mahakaccana has taken the Buddha's brief statement and analyzed it in terms of the 6 senses. And this is a favorite teaching framework used by Mahakaccana, of course found many times through the suttas. So let's just briefly consider this particular mode of analysis. So we have sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, and the mind. So in Buddhism, mind is the 6th sense. Okay, and the reason for developing that analogy, I mean, it's an interesting way of framing it, because the mind obviously in many ways is very different than the other senses. Each of the other senses, relatively speaking, is very simple, and the mind is very complex and handles and does a whole lot of things which the other senses do not. Like perception and volition and all of those things. So in a way, it's reasonable to think of the mind as something which is distinct from the senses, so the five senses and the mind. But the Buddha included it as one of the senses. And one of the reasons for doing that is so that we can understand the more complex reality of the mind by analogy with the more simple realities of the senses. So we can start our meditation with the senses, understanding sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And then with that understanding in hand, we are better equipped to understand the mind, which works in some ways similarly, in other ways differently. Okay, so this is one of the purposes of this meditation. In fact, we'll be doing, or this teaching framework, and we're going to be doing a meditation based on this teaching framework, probably on the last day of the retreat, or the last full day of the retreat. Now, this framework is found very often in the suttas, hundreds of times, taught in different kinds of ways. Nothing unusual about that. And the basic way that Mahakachana is starting here is quite standard. Eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. The meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. So this is all standard and found many times in the suttas. Let's just briefly go over it. So we have eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. Okay, so we have three things here. The eye. Okay, we got that? Everyone clear? Good. That's excellent. Whenever you're beginning meditation, especially beginning insight meditation, or really any kind of meditation, it's absolutely important to start with the simple and basic things, even if you think that that's too obvious, right? So we reflect on it, we're aware of it. It's the eye. Finishing the meditation more quickly isn't regarded as being necessarily a good thing. I find sights, right? We can see things, okay? So unless our eye faculty is impaired, if we're blind, for example, we can't see anything, or there's no, then the eye is not working, right? Or if sights are not working, for example, if you're in a place that's completely dark, then there's no stimulus through the eye, right? So assuming that the eye is working and that that there are sights, then those two conditions are fulfilled. Now, let's just consider this briefly. What do you see? Sorry? Light? Form? Color?
Simple holes.
Simple
holes.
Holes. Simple holes, okay? Anyone else?
Space.
States.
Space.
Space. You see space.
Yeah. Dimensions.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Distance.
Distance.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyone else? Movement. Okay. Anyone else? What else do you see? Sorry? Faces. 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 Okay. What about adorable little field mice? I saw one the other day just outside the hall down here. It's so cute. And it saw me, and then it hid its adorable little face under a leaf and thought that I couldn't see it. That's what the echidnas do that in Australia as well. Yeah, like, you know echidna? Like a hedgehog? Yeah. And they'll be walking along the path, and then when they see you, they just kind of stop and they just and you're like, you're just sitting there, I can see you. No, you can't see me. Okay. All right. So those answers were all wonderful, and I love you all, but they all got worse from the first one. Light is what we see, right? Light is what we see. And colors, right? Colors are like wavelengths of light. So that's one of the attributes of light. You see also the intensities of light. But everything like faces or adorable little mousies, these are not things you actually see. These are like ideas in your mind, right? So these are perceptions. Also, you said simple whole, same thing, it's perception. This is all going on in your mind. Right? Your eye only sees light. Okay? Wavelengths of light is color, amplitude of light is brightness. Yeah. Positions of light, so you're talking about space and distance, okay. Although you don't see like spaces, it's getting a little bit conceptual, but so fair enough. You see like an absence of light or something like that anyway. But the main point here is that what you see is light. Yeah. Okay, we good? Right. So then eye consciousness. Eye consciousness is the awareness of that sight. So eye consciousness is aware of sight, which has which is light, as we just said, and that light has particular kinds of properties. So if you think about eye consciousness, it has quite distinctive properties from, say, ear consciousness. Right? Sound is a completely different realm than sight. You can say, well, sight, for example, has like a precision in terms of locating things, right? Whereas sound doesn't. And there are many different properties, but there's just like a feel that sight has that sound does not have. And notice these things never get mixed up, like you never see things from your ear. I shouldn't mention these things, so I'm sure somebody will go out and invent a gadget where you put a camera in your ear or something like that. You can hook your camera onto your ear consciousness. You could hook your camera onto like the ear sound pathways in your brain, and then you could see sounds.
Doesn't sight and hearing sometimes get confused?
Sorry?
Doesn't sight and hearing sometimes get confused in certain illusions? Like that famous or that well-known one where this person is saying a word and then
Yes.
they're about changing in a different way and you hear something else. But really actually it's the
I'm
same.
sorry, I missed the first part of that. The famous what?
So there's a psychological experiment
Ah, okay, yeah.
and it's let's say a video of this man's face
Right,
and he's saying something
right,
and you hear his whatever word.
yeah,
But then you change a slight condition and the same movement of the mouth
yeah.
elicits a different sound.
A different sound.
Yeah, so it's like an illusion, so it's like a trick being played.
It's
on your
a
sight.
between sight and hearing. When you say different sound, you mean the sound is recognized as a different word.
Yeah.
So that would be in the mind.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Already.
Just using eye consciousness and
Ear consciousness, yeah. But those kinds of experiments, of course, are very interesting, revealing something about the role of perception. Right? So again, perception is creating meaningful wholes out of experience. So if you have perception of a person and words, and these are all perceptions. That's not sight and sound. Right?
What about synesthesia, where
Right.
you see something, but you taste what right, where the things get
I
mixed
know.
up a little bit,
I
they
know.
bleed together.
I immediately thought of that as soon as I said that you don't get them mixed up. Yeah. Again, I mean, I think that's interesting. I did a talk once with a guy who had synesthesia, and so I don't think he was content to like have all of his senses mixed up, because then he also like installed an antenna in the back of his head where he could listen to satellites beamed directly into his brain. Some people are different, right? Yeah. So I think those things are interesting, but certainly we can say, kind of generally speaking, that it's true that these things are kept separate, right? And generally, when those things are confused, you usually assume that it's something up with the processing of those sounds, right? Or processing of those experiences, where they can get confused, which again would be like a perception level, rather than the sight. But again, don't like, we don't want to like insist on these things too much, okay? Right? You can always find exceptions to things. For example, there's probably beings who have senses other than the six, right? I'm assuming that there are. But anyway, so that generally speaking, this is describing how the structure of experience works, okay? So eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. So this is something that we develop the awareness of through vipassana meditation. So vipassana insight meditation learns to distinguish, it's a sight. It's not seeing someone or seeing something. It's just a sight. So eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sounds. The meeting of the three is contact. Ooh. Right? That's what happens. All those three things come together. So we have consciousness, eye, and the sights. And somehow they collide. The Buddha called this, if it's a physical senses, the Buddha called it patigha sampasa. That's the contact of clashing or colliding. And so notice that there's something, there has to be some kind of physical collision there. Like the photons have to actually hit your eye, or the sound waves have to actually hit your ear. So it has to be like a physical movement of something that that creates an energy disturbance that can actually be detected by your nervous system and so on. All right, so eye consciousness arises dependent on the eye and sights. Meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling. So these things are all very, very closely related: contact, feeling, perception, and so on. Now, again, feeling in the context of sights, okay? Be careful about what we're meaning when we're talking about feeling in the concept of sights. Feeling in the context of sights doesn't necessarily mean seeing something that you like. It's a little bit different because that, again, is perception. Yeah? This is talking about something that's even more primal. An obvious example would be simply walking out into the bright sun when you've been into a dark room and your eyes are open and ow, it hurts. Yeah? So this is that feeling, the feeling from literally an eye sensation feeling, not a desire or perception or memory sensation, which is all belongs to the mind. Yeah. So again, these are very fine distinctions, but this is important for building up our understanding of how our mind and body work. Yeah.
No, go ahead. We'll follow you.
So you mentioned there when you go outside and the blinding sun, you see how it hurts. And that's a feeling.
Yeah.
But isn't how it hurts a perception of the feeling?
How it hurts is a perception of feeling, yeah. That
How it
hurts is,
hurts, like that's a perception.
yeah,
The feeling is just a feeling.
that's
So
right.
any words describe it, perception.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I was still on the contact bit. How can something physical have contact with something non-physical?
Which one? What do you mean? Oh, you mean the consciousness?
Consciousness is presumably non-physical.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, the two senses is the physical thing, right? So the form and the eye meeting is a physical thing, yeah. And then with the consciousness is the non-physical, yeah.
So how can a non-physical entity have contact with a physical entity?
How can it not have contact?
Physical things have space and time allocation.
That is true, yeah.
And non-physical things have not. So how, where, or when would they have?
Don't they?
I don't know.
I mean, where does your consciousness live right now?
I don't know anything about my consciousness.
Come on, that's just getting out of it. Your mind lives in your body if you feel like you're here. Yeah, pretty much most of the time. I don't want to get too much into this question, but just let me just posit a different approach that Buddhism makes compared to the approach that we used to from, or if you're used to Western philosophy, okay? So Western philosophy often unconsciously or consciously struggles with this idea of dualism, okay? Dualism, the mind and body are separate. One of the earliest expressions of that comes from the very first chapter in Genesis, where you have the body is created and then God breathed life into it. And so the body and the spirit or the consciousness or the soul or whatever you want to call it are actually separate things which are fused together. And of course, Rene Descartes famously talked about dualism and so on and so forth. Buddhism approaches things from a fundamentally different point of view, because we don't begin by positing certain ontologically existing things, right? And you can see, like in this teaching, that the primary reality is the experience, which includes both physical and mental dimensions. Yeah, that's the primary reality. And then by analysis, we tease out the different properties of those things. And we can say, oh yeah, this is like a physical property, this is a mental property, and so on. And that's kind of secondary. But the primary reality is a network and a complex of things.
It's never said that consciousness is non-physical.
Yeah. Yeah, they're always part of the same network. They exist as part of the same network and not something independent from that network. Yeah. Okay. Okay, moving on. Meeting of the three is contact. Contact is a condition for feeling, pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling. Just by explanation, in Buddhism, when we use the word feeling, it's a bit simpler than emotion. Okay, so feeling means I like it, I don't like it, I don't care about it. That's it. Okay, so that's all. Yeah, everything more complex as emotions are considered a bit separately. That's the main thing. All right. Meaning of these contact, context, condition for feeling. Okay. Now, so far we have what is basically mostly pretty much an automatic process. Yeah, what is it? A Rube Goldberg machine. Is that right? Rube Goldberg machine. One thing falls over and then tips the other one and tips the other one, tips the other one, and that's it. Yeah, some dominoes falling over. And that's how your experience is, right? When you're walking around seeing things, most of the time, you just see, or whatever. It's not something you consciously choose to do. Now, then, contact is a condition for feeling. What you feel, you perceive. What you perceive, you think about. What you think about, you proliferate. So you can notice here that the syntax changes. From the key terms are no longer nouns. The key terms are now verbs. Yeah. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? So we're moving from a world of things conditioning each other to processes flowing along. Yeah? And there's an interesting aspect of this which we can't unfortunately capture in English. So you can tell me whether you can do this in your language, but in English you have to have a subject to the verb. So I have to say you do this, or one does this, or something like that. But in Pali, that's not how it works. In Pali, the subject is optional. And so you can just have a verb with an implicit subject. So here, subjects are implicit. Okay, so if I was to translate this literally into English, it would be contact is a condition for feeling. What feel, perceive. What perceive, think about. What think about, proliferate. Right? So there's no subject, kind of implied, but not actually on the surface. Yeah? How does that work in different languages? Can you do that in any other languages? Sorry? Spanish, you can do that? How would you say that in Spanish?
Void. Well, I'm not fluently Spanish. Maybe somebody else.
Because no way, you cannot say keyboard. So you have it, but in brackets, like in your mind, you know that the person is there. even
Ah.
though you don't- it's-
That's right, same in,
Built
it's
into
the same in
the-
Pali, it's implicit, yeah, it's implicit. So how would you phrase that in Spanish? What you feel, or what feel, perceive? Okay,
I guess there's a neutral article, lo is very loose. You would say lo que siente, percibe.
okay, okay,
Is rarely used.
okay, good, yeah. Interesting how different languages handle these things differently. I think in Chinese, you can probably do it, right? Anyone speak Chinese here? I think in Chinese, you can have like, you can leave the subject implicit, right?
Especially in ancient Chinese, ancient texts.
Okay, yeah,
And I think during the period where Buddhism was very expanded or developed,
yeah,
there were some authors who were like removing the
Yeah.
pronoun
right,
subject,
okay,
like I
yeah,
on the text.
okay. Yeah, okay. Any other, so you said Polish? How would you say it in Polish?
Instances what would be you perceive,
Yeah,
to czujesz, postrzegasz.
okay. Yeah, good. So you can, after we finished, after we finish the retreat, you can check Piotr's translation and see whether he got that bit right. And if he didn't, then we'll have words.
But the subject is what? What feels the subject is?
Exactly. Right? Subject is implicit. Yeah. So what's happening is that the sense of self is starting to be active. So it's you who's starting to do these things, but the you who's doing it is not really fully formed yet. It's an implicit thing, like you're starting to respond to it, but yourself hasn't actually really manifested yet. Yeah, very, very subtle. Linguistically, it's very subtle. It was actually Venerable Padakunda in the Yanananda who first kind of analysed this, the grammar of this in a lot of detail. So what you feel, you perceive. What you feel, yang vedeti tanpa pancheti. Yeah. So now the process is not exactly just dominoes falling, but an action which is starting to fuel, the energy starting to build up, momentum starting to build up, and you are starting to become the agent of your experience. Yeah.
Shouldn't say thought proliferate.
Yeah, you could say thought.
Perceive most things.
You could say thought proliferates, but that's not quite what the text is saying. The text isn't quite saying that the thought is the agent. The implication is that it's the implied or I wouldn't quite say unconscious, but unmanifest self which is proliferating. Yeah. Unrealized. Yeah. Okay. So what you feel, you perceive, right? So this is pointing to the close connections between feeling and perception. We've already talked about both of these things, and you can see that feeling and perception are actually very closely linked. And also they're very closely linked just purely from a survival motive, right? Just from like what food is good to eat, and you know what you know, whether fire is burning and that kind of thing. So you learn from your feelings to inform your perceptions about what is safe, what is not safe, what is clean, what is not clean, what is edible, what is not edible. So perception in and of itself is precognitive. Right? So perception happens at this kind of automatic level that does not necessarily involve language, right? But perception often invokes language, and it often makes use of language. And in order to solidify our perceptions, we give labels to things and we name them. And so this is one of the major jobs that humanity has done for thousands of years. We've gone around this world, and we've seen things, and we've invented names for things. And then we're like, hey, I've got names for all these things. And then we spend the rest of our lives arguing about whether we've got the correct name for the thing. It's just a label. It's literally just a label you're sticking on something. And like, if you think about it, what an amazing thing that is. Like, you think about something like biology, right? I mean, half the life of biology is like putting names on things. Discovering new species, you know? And these days, LA has been in the news because of the fire, which is still raging and still breaking things down. But I read an article some years ago about LA saying that if you go into the hills in the right season, you can wander around, and the good chances are you'll find an undiscovered mushroom in the hills, even just the hills around LA. Yeah? You don't have to go to the deepest jungles or something like that. There's so many different kinds of life, not to mention in the oceans. So many different kinds of life and so on, which we've been diligently giving names to and arguing, does this one go with that one or that one go with that one? And so this is our perception. And why do we do this? We do this because it helps us to make sense of the world. We can then refer to things. And we can then act upon them. Somebody can convey information to us. This mushroom is edible, this mushroom is not edible. And this gives us important information. So this is like perception works together with language, but language is like a step a little bit further, a little bit more complex than perception. Now, thinking is good. Thinking is constructive. So what we're talking about here is vitakka. And so vitakka, obviously, you can have good thoughts and bad thoughts, right? But the faculty of being able to think is good. It's constructive and it's meaningful. It helps us to make sense of the world. And so as long as we're thinking good thoughts, then we're on the Noble Eightfold Path. But the problem is, then what you think about, you proliferate. And that's where things start to go a bit astray. And where that sense of self is now coming to the fore and now starting to be in control. So proliferation is the spinning out of the mind in networks and tendrils and ideas and associations leaping around and in this complex realm. And it's all the way from like dream states where you just go into free association and the mind can just connect all of these bizarre things towards just meaningless spinning of fantasies. Sometimes those fantasies driven by desires, sometimes driven by hatreds, sometimes just driven by delusion. Just going out. And sometimes it feels like there's no end to it. Feels like that perception has no end to it. And what this is doing, what this passage is doing, is it's trying to teach us how do these things come up so that we can understand how we can bring them to an end. What you proliferate is the source from which, so in the previous statement, the initial statement given by the Buddha, it spoke of the source, but it didn't say what that source is. And so this passage now, the explanation is identifying the source. The source is in fact the proliferations itself. So the proliferations are the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. And so now the judgments are the sankhara. I mentioned before, perceptions are sanya, proliferations are papancha, and the judgments are sankhara. And the judgments are, if you like, the final term in this whole thing, from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. And this is something like a lot of people have mentioned in their meditation interviews. It's a major thing that happens in meditation, that you're sitting there and I'm going to do metta, I'm going to do metta, but then I can't stop thinking about this and I can't stop thinking about that. And then what happens? Oh, I'm a bad meditator. Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. That's exactly what that's talking about. So we start to assess, what is this? Is this good? Is this bad? We start to weigh ourselves up, to compare ourselves. I'm good enough. I'm not good enough. So here I am, I'm a meditation teacher. My job is to get you to meditate. And so I sit here and I say to you, but you are good enough. And you sit there and say, yeah, it's just saying that. I am just saying that, yeah, but I have to, it's part of my job. But I am just saying it, but I also mean it, all right? I'm a monk, I'm not allowed to lie. Okay? So this is that end point. And just think about, like, for many people have spoken, and I'm sure even those who haven't spoken about it, it's still a reality for many of us. You think about how much of an obstacle that is in our practice. Just our own judgments about what we can do. I hear this so often in people's meditations. Oh, I could never do that. Oh, it's not me. I'm not a good meditator. I'm not a good Buddhist. All this kind of stuff, right? Judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. That's what that is. Yeah. Doesn't mean anything, to be honest. It's just how the mind creates these fantasies about who you are, what you are. And then the source from which judgments driven by proliferating perceptions beset a person. Here we've now reached the nadir of the meditator's experience. Now we're not just thinking. Now we're not just proliferating. Now we're making these judgments, and these judgments are falling on top of our heads like a waterfall, like an avalanche. We're crushed underneath these judgments, the weight of them, which are now besetting a person. Who is that person? That's you, of course, right? And now that person has emerged from the implicit person of the verbs, right? It was before was kind of implied that there was an agent to the verbs, and now that agent has fully emerged but is no longer an agent. This is really fascinating. The moment where the agent emerges consciously, the agent is in fact no longer an agent, but the agent is now beset. The agent is in fact the victim of their thoughts. Yeah? The agent is the victim of their thoughts. The person is the victim of their thoughts. Remember, I talked about this in the earlier talks about how you are the agent of your thoughts. And it's hard to see that actually in meditation, even though it's actually obvious that we are the agent of our thoughts. It's somehow hidden. Yeah? It's a hidden part of our mind, and we don't see the role that our self-creation plays in that. So in Pali, also have the same word in Sanskrit, but in Pali we have the word attakara. Yeah? And attakara means, or ahankara, means I-making. Right? So ahankara is I-making. So in Indian philosophy, you don't really have a word that corresponds with the Western psychological term of the ego. So instead you have this word ahankara in Buddhism, ahankara, I-making. And this is that really important difference, because the ego, or Western psychology they consider the ego, always kind of confused me about what it was. I never quite got what the ego was. Actually, when Freud was using the word, he just used the word the I. Right? It's just the I which he's talking about, is that sense of I inside you. But that sense of I is not something that's given. It's not something that's fixed. It's something that you make. Yeah, it's something that you create. Ahankara is the I making. So whenever these thoughts are occurring and that sense of self is coming up underneath it, and these proliferations and these judgments are coming, I and mine and so on, then this is where that ahankara is working. You are creating your sense of self in every moment. This is, I think, really crucial for understanding Buddhist psychology, or just understanding your own mind. People in Buddhism talk a lot about not self, and I might talk a little bit more about it later. But one of the problems with the way people talk about not self, I think, is that it implies that there is a thing which we have to, like the idea of a self or something like that, which we have to get rid of, or which we have to detach ourselves from. And I'm not sure that that's entirely healthy, to be honest. Actually, the sense of self is something that we're building up. We don't have to get rid of that sense of self. We just have to stop building it up. The sense of self is impermanent. Our conceit is impermanent. It's already fading away if we're not building it up. And so as soon as you begin to understand that this is the process by which it's happening, then you're starting to unravel it a little bit by little bit. You don't have to contemplate about not self or anything, but you're contemplating how am I creating a self? And when you're not doing that, then not self is easy. So this happens, so the set a person, and then this happens with respect to sights known by the eye in the past, future, and present, right? Also a fascinating shift. Now, we don't just have a person who is a victim of their thoughts, we have the past, present, and future. That person now exists throughout time. Instead of being just an experience, which you're seeing in the present, which is very simple, now we've got a whole person, all these perceptions, all this stuff happening, and in the past, present, and future. It's nuts. It's crazy. I was just like seeing a little mouse in the field, and now I've got a whole person involved. What the hell's up with that? Right? And so this is how this is telling us something really crucial about the nature of time and the nature of the past, present, and future. Very simply, is that the past, present, and future are a construct which is related to the construct of the self. In other words, we make the past, present, and future. It's not something that happens to us, right? In this process, right? You can see in this process, it's perceived and it's constructed as being something that happens to you. You become the victim of all of this. But if we undo this process, you realize that past, present, future is not real. Only the present is real. Everything else is something that we're constructing. It can be handy, sure. It has predictive power and all of that kind of stuff. But the reality of our experience is in the present. And when we realize that the past and the future are something that we're constructing, then it makes meditation a lot easier. Because rather than thinking of the past and the future as being this vast space between which we have to walk on this narrow tightrope, makes it hard. Then instead, the present is everything we have ever known and everything we will ever know. Everything we have known is in the present. So being in the present is the easiest thing in the world. We just have to stop making ourselves go to the past and future. It's a complete shift. Rather than trying to be in the present, we stop creating the past and the future. The present is just there. It's just given to you. That's why they call it the present. And
I understand how the mind goes to the future,
Yeah.
but here is the sights known by the eye in the future. So
Yes.
that's the eye itself.
with respect to, with respect to sights known by the eye. It's not the sights themselves, but it's your mind thinking about those sights. Right? Yeah. So the visual experience itself is just what kicks off this process. That's just that very first bit. Everything else is going to the realms of the mind. And so what you've seen has then stimulated that whole thing. But the sight is only in the present. This again is one of the reasons why we always begin meditation by being grounded in physical senses, because the physical senses are always in the present. Yes.
Sorry. Does this present mean Meaning also in Pali or other languages, present, perfect, and the present. Well, you know, it has a double exception in any language.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. It's a bit hard to understand you from all the way back there, sorry.
So, the second question, the present.
Yes.
And the present, and also a present as well.
Oh, okay.
And, in any language, you know, this exception of the word present
Yeah,
have a double meaning.
I don't know. Does present mean a present in other languages? In French?
Well, but
No?
it's
Présent. Yeah? French?
yes, of course, but
Of course, I don't
English is in the past centuries, English is very much French. Exception, actually.
The French in English is very much French. I think the English would have words with you about that, but sure, fair enough.
It's the first Latin language of English.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Chinese is actually it means right in front of you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So all this knowledge that we are extracting from this paragraph,
Yeah.
was it obtained through meditation or was an analytical exercise as it's done in the Western kind of tradition? So the fact that they know all this chain, right? of
Yeah.
Sequence. Is it really a result from doing metta meditation, for example? Or is it from where do they know this? The reason why I'm asking is because very often I do not understand how they make these jumps of I meditated this and then boom, I learned this. No? I had this experience meditating, then of course the conclusion is this. No? I wonder
I understand, yeah.
these kind of derivative insights or something like that are the source of this kind of
Okay. So, yeah, interesting question then, well, you know, to what degree are meditative insights the source for insights or understandings of text, and what degree is it linguistically an insight? Okay, so first of all is that they're not necessarily different things, right? Because your understanding of the scripture also informs your meditation, and then your meditation informs the understanding of scripture. So there are certain things about it which obviously are just technical, right? So understanding that Pali has inherent, or Pali verbs can have inherent subjects, right? That's something that's purely just you learn from the grammar. But then also the understanding of those things comes from also meditation experience as well. But I think so again, just to say that for myself, you know, when I'm reading that and saying, oh, that these things are happening with an implicit sense of self, to me that makes sense because that agrees with my meditation experience. When I look in my experience, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually what's happening. And so that to me is what something is really insightful about this particular passage. But the broader point that you're making is a really important one, which is that there isn't like a specific one-to-one relationship between a particular spiritual text and particular meditation experiences. And we often try to pin down the relationship between these things as if it was unproblematic, but it is never quite as simple as it seems. And we see like a lot of attempts these days to do things like try to establish various you know, states of meditation by like reading people's brain waves and these kinds of things. But which to me is, I mean, it's okay, but like we don't know anything really about how the brain works or how it relates to the mind. So maybe we want to work those things out. We'd figure out like some of the basics first without imagining that we knew something about advanced states of meditation. the Pali texts and early Buddhist texts kind of invite this because they have a very analytical and very precise and psychological approach to meditation. So as we can see in this particular sutta, right? So it's breaking it down in a form. Now the form that it's breaking down to is a bit too neat, right? The mind actually is very complex. So this is telling us something about how the mind works, which is very insightful, but obviously it's not everything. And at the end of the day, it's just words. So you can't, there's no substitute for experience. It can help to illuminate your experience, but it's no substitute for experience. One of the things which is, I think, really helpful in understanding this is is context. And this is something which I see is extremely often just ignored and omitted in modern discussions about suttas and about meanings of suttas. In fact, I'd say almost always it's completely forgotten. Just one example, when we're talking about the jhanas or absorptions, they're defined in terms of certain mental factors and so on. Now, the strata of Buddhist literature, which discusses mental factors with a lot of precision and detail, more than anything else, is the Abhidhamma. And of course, that's what the Abhidhamma does. It takes, if you remember, we talked about this on earlier. We talked about the suttas. You have the suttas, the Vinaya, and the Abhidhamma. So the Abhidhamma is the third collection, and that contains the analytical text. And the analytical texts take all of those mental factors and define them and so on and so forth, right? But to me, it's very interesting that if you look at the Jhana Vibhanga, the Abhidhamma analysis of jhanas, it begins with your lifestyle. It doesn't begin with the analysis of the mental factors. It begins with renunciation and undertaking of precepts and practicing of contentment and all of these kinds of things, which are conspicuously absent from most modern discussions of these mental states. Yeah. But interesting question, though, and that's something which those of us who are pursuing, we're interested in both scriptures and meditation experience, then it's important to sort of be aware which one you're coming from and how that's working together. But from an integrative, from myself, you try to work from an integrative perspective.
Yeah, it's just a really nice. I came back to this experience that I have sometimes. I read books or texts, and they say when you experience these things, no, or
right,
they come to that conclusion.
Right.
I just feel things.
Yeah.
Making a big jump.
Yeah.
To make this conclusion is like, wow.
That's right.
I was wondering also, so this sequence that they're like,
yeah.
I guess at some point someone proposed it based potentially on somebody's lived experience. I'm just proposing that for me it sounds like, wow, huge step.
Yeah. Yeah. Rebecca.
You just said feeling and emotions are different.
Generally speaking, Buddhism, feelings and emotions are obviously related, but yeah.
And how does the emotion or emotional intelligence, or even like heart, fit in this framework?
How does emotional intelligence or heart fit into this framework? Does it?
You follow your heart.
Do you?
It's a phrase that people use often.
Okay.
So heart is obviously not mind in its context, based on my understanding.
Okay.
And so I'm just confused about this whole heart initially, which is used very often.
Follow your heart, but what if your heart really sucks? What if your heart tells you, yes, you do want to cheat with your partner? Yes, yes, you do want to withdraw all of your life savings and invest it in Bitcoin.
Seems like mine.
No, but your heart is telling you that. It's the most pure intention. So when people say things like this, I mean, whatever it means is always a bit kind of obscure or whatever, but you know, people are sort of pointing to like a faculty of intuition or something like that, which is it's not. I mean, what this is really talking about is the arising of delusion, right? So it's not really talking. If what you mean by heart is intuition or intuitive wisdom, then that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about how we lose our intuition, how we lose our wisdom. And you know, this is why these problems of like saying follow your heart and things like that. Yeah, whatever. Want to follow your heart, it's all right. But lots of people's hearts seem to lead them in very strange directions. But the Buddhist idea is that also, you know, your heart or your intuition is something to be trained as well, something to be interrogated, not just to be followed blindly. And so your heart can speak with wisdom or it can speak with foolishness.
And what about emotion? How does emotion fit in this consciousness framework?
Indirectly? Yeah, indirectly. So this is mostly talking about like cognition and thought and so on. And it's not really focusing on emotion so much. But again, remember, every teaching is just what it is. It doesn't have to be everything. And so I could sort of try to get emotion and try to say, well, it kind of fits in here and it fits in there and so on. But I'm not sure that's really the point, right? Of this, in this particular teaching. Does that make sense? I'd rather just say, oh, let's have a look at it in another context. It's actually been talked about. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Let's see though. Let's see how that might happen later on. Right? Yeah. No. An arahant would still proliferate. No. An arahant thinks the thoughts that they want to think and doesn't think the thoughts they don't want to think. Yeah.
So the proliferation is not proliferation.
You do not want proliferation. Yes, perhaps I haven't made that clear enough. Don't proliferate.
Just don't have to find anything where it's filtering or getting attached to in the
Right.
source and where they are.
Right. Right.
So when you do that kind of normal proliferation.
That's right. Then the proliferation ends. Yeah. So that's pointing to the fact that there's something in that, something underlying that process, which is something that you want. Yeah. There's some kind of desire there. And maybe it's something you want, maybe it's something that you want to get rid of, maybe it's something you fear. There's something which is underneath driving that. And that's again sort of points to that, the fact that kind of that middle section where it's starting to pick up steam and you're starting to have an implicit sense of self underneath that. And there's something which is driving that implicit sense of self, right? It wants to defend itself, it wants to justify itself, it wants to protect itself. Right? So you see your sense of self is starting to grasp around that thing that you've seen, that experience, and start to shape it and shift it and to make it into something that exists for you rather than an experience that just is. Mm. Did you ever have that? No. Did you? Yes.
How this sequence relates to dependent origination? Because perception would be part of Brahma, right? Proliferation would be grasping and becoming. Is it correct?
Not necessarily. So the question is, how does this relate to dependent origination? So dependent origination, for those who are not familiar, is a key Buddhist teaching about the nature or the chain of factors which keeps life going in samsara or in kind of endless stream of transmigration. But this is, so for a start, this isn't talking about past lives and future lives. It's just talking about experience in the present. So it's purely psychological teaching rather than an existential one, right? So that's number one. Well, it kind of hints at that at the end when it's talking about the past, present, and future, but it's mostly just concerned purely psychologically. So the bit where it's talking about the arising of consciousness and sense consciousness, that's actually found in the context of dependent origination quite a bit. And so then it kind of leads on and talks about how that gives rise, as you said, to grasping into future lives and so on, which is the concern of dependent origination. But here, that's not the concern. Here, the concern is how it gives rise to proliferation. Yeah? So it goes in a slightly different direction, takes the same basic idea and then treats it in a slightly different way. In a way, you could say this is because some people say dependent origination is all about like one lifetime dependent origination. Actually, this is the one lifetime dependent origination. Yeah. And there's a number of other passages that are like that as well. You know, so the suttas are pretty clear when they're talking about, obviously, yes, it is dependently originated, right? The senses and the thought process and consciousness and everything. And there's plenty of suttas like this which talk about how that arises in the present. And the point of dependent origination as such is to say that that same process is what drives the process of rebirth. Yeah. Flavia.
This part with saying welcoming and improving,
Yeah.
is this also pointing to the importance of self-restraint in part of the same?
So just talking about the importance of sense restraint and guarding the senses. I mean, I guess so. Not kind of directly. I mean, it's a little bit more general than that. But yeah, certainly it's talking about being mindful with regards to how you're receiving the experience of the senses. This is like this whole sutta is really pitched at a level of like vipassana, which is like a wisdom practice, rather than sense restraint, which is sort of morality practice.
Because I never really was able or to grasp what is actually meant with restraining the senses. Because it never says anything about practicing, it only says if a person perceives sight,
right?
if they're never careful not to get lost in the futures.
That's right, yeah. Yeah. So it's obviously related to that, yeah, sure. Okay, any other question? Yeah.
Which is comprehensive, but I was thinking, yeah, the real activity, there are some, you need to know that people are people and stuff. So, you know, then, in this Buddhism, it's something about like how we should build up your worlds from the data to
No, I didn't. I couldn't hear what you said at the end.
that's not so much
I'm also not sure. But at least we got that in common. Again, I'm not really sure what kind of thing you're trying to ask here.
maybe I'm misunderstanding, if you go back to like the basics of like what you're seeing is just light or something. And then you realize that those things are just illusion. Like that.
Maybe.
But then to live my life, I can live my life in how I'm seeing is just life, and
Sure, yeah.
it's useless in this world.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So then I have to construct my world in some way.
Okay, yeah.
To see like how things fit together in the world and how I make sense of my world. And like that also the sense making them from that point. Yeah, Just what do you do with that, or what's?
You reconstruct the world, but without craving. That's all. The world remains as it is. Yeah. Look, honestly, I'd say don't worry about it. That's the part I'm going to say. Don't worry about it. The world will reconstruct itself without you having to worry about it too much. The only time that actually becomes an issue is if you go way too deep and intensely into meditation, and then you can actually go break the world up, or the world can really break down in meditation, and then that can cause like a psychotic break. It can cause a psychotic break, and that does happen in especially intensive vipassana retreats. Sounds not uncommon. And that's precisely what's happening there, is that you go in, you deconstruct the world, and you don't have any way of putting it back together. And so that comes from like an unbalanced and extreme approach to practice. But if you're not, otherwise, the world reconstructs itself. You don't have to worry about it. It's like a chemist. You do an experiment. You know that these are atoms and molecules and stuff, but you don't have any problem relating to grains of sand and bricks and so on when you come out of the laboratory. Yeah.
It reconstructs like different ways of interacting with the world, of being in the world.
Okay. Yeah, so certainly, yeah, it does give you that's actually a really good point, because once you sort of see how things work and see how things are made, you have then more autonomy. You have more like a choice and volition about how you relate to things. You realize, oh, you've been trapped in patterns. You've been seeing people in a certain way, and you can then sort of learn to deconstruct those and to live in the world in a more wholesome way. That's true. And I mean, an obvious example would be like deconstructing, say, bigotry or prejudices that you might have. You particularly saw a particular kind of people this way or something like that, and then you can realize, oh, actually, what's going on is just people, right? It's just these experiences and these perceptions and things like that, and then you realize, oh, they're just human beings who are suffering, and so then that can give rise to compassion rather than to dismissiveness and dehumanization. Yeah.
I thought it was a stupid question, because this is for me, Dutch we say hogere aspecten, higher space. Could you translate it? Rocket science. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! Thank you. I feel so proud.
This
you
is
say that.
really, I start proliferating. Because
it's good.
Like wow, catching my breath. Thinking, what am I doing here? And I don't know so much about the text, but there is one text, and I think that is much simpler, and as far as I am concerned, probably it is stupid. It says exactly the same thing, and that's the Bahia Sutta, which says in the hearing on Buddha says in the hearing on isn't that sort of the same?
Isn't that sort of the same? Is the Bahia Sutta sort of the same?
No, not true, but the outcome. I mean,
No, sure, it is, yeah, it is.
The outcome is similar, perhaps, in my perception. Yes.
Your perception.
In my proliferation.
Yeah, that's not a proliferation, that's a connection, right? Because you're making a meaningful connection, okay? Right? So proliferation would have been, like the Bahia Sutta is like that. And then there's that, isn't there a passage in Charles Dickens which says this? And what is for dinner tomorrow? That proliferation, okay, so,
Really keep it simple.
yeah.
Bahia Sutta, I understand this perhaps also, but
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
not completely like how my brain works. And I wondered also about the bhikkhunis in the time to Buddha got this as well. Help me.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Like we don't know too much about like specifics of like who was taught which and what was taught where, right? But we can say a few things. So in the period after the Buddha, for like 1,000 years, there especially a period like 1 to 200 BC to about 500-600 AD, something like that. There are probably a few hundred inscriptions throughout India that record things like donations of temples or Buddha statues or setting up of stupas and so on. You probably have something here. I'm not sure if there's like a plaque that says this was donated at such and such a time by such and such a people. So if you look at those inscriptions, then about half of them mention bhikkhus and about half of them mention bhikkhunis. And the bhikkhunis are mentioned in the same kinds of roles that the bhikkhus are. So it would be something like the bhikkhuni such and such has come here with 300 people from her own village and they have donated the stupa for such and such. So that shows you that bhikkhunis were in the leadership positions, that they had large communities of people they were teaching, that they had access to those resources that could do those kinds of things. And those things are more or less similar. One of the things in those inscriptions is that it describes, it gives various epithets to the different bhikkhunis, and to the bhikkhus as well. One of them, which is the Pitaka Dharani, meaning someone who's memorized the 3 Pitakas. And so, we can say from that it was considered kind of normal that the bhikkhunis would be studying and memorizing. Yeah. Right.
All right.
And then some of them might be like, that they've memorized like Anakaya or something like that. The Pitaka is obviously the biggest one. So yeah. A bit similar. A bit similar. Bhante Sutta is kind of interesting though. The reason I'm just like a bit hesitant is because there are interesting things to say about the Bhante Sutta, which is not quite the same as what this sutta is saying, and which I could speak on at some length, but I'm just restraining myself.
Yeah,
I want you to just appreciate my kindness.
And then I understand perhaps a bit.
Yeah. I'm sure you understand more than a little. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah,
You mentioned earlier that the self sense is something that you build up.
Yeah.
It's something. The first question is self-sense the same as your identity?
Yes, more or less, yeah.
So basically, your identity is something that's impermanence, something that you can build up.
Yes. Yeah.
So then I come to the question like then who am I then? Like if I'm not my identity, then who am I? Because when I get a question like, hey, who are you? And I said like, I am such and such and such, but I always have a feeling that it's not for real. No, not for real, it's real, but it's not like you said, it's impermanence. And so then this question is who am I and why am I asking myself, who am I?
right?
And it's like, who are you? I mean, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. I know what the question is about, but I don't quite know what it is.
Like, so you are like your identity. And
Can you phrase the question as a question? Begin with a question word, one short sentence without subsidiary clauses, and then a question mark. So good. That's like so good. Excellent. Thank you for that. Who are you? Next question. When you say who am I, you are already assuming the answer, that there is an answer, that you are something. Who am I assumes that there is an I who is something. So from a Buddhist point of view, you would maybe rephrase that and say, how am I constructing my idea of self?
yeah, so it's like, am I then what is it called? Am I then the perception that I made? I mean,
Yes.
the perceptions.
Yes. Yeah. It's weird, right? And that's actually like such a powerful point. Like we are essentially the perception that we have of who we are. And like a lot of suffering in the world comes because our perception of who we are doesn't match with the reality of who we are. Right? And so this is where people get like low self-esteem because they are something, but they think they should be something else. That maybe I think I should look a certain way, or I should have certain achievements, or I should be able to have certain friends, or I should be able to do these things. And so we measure ourselves. Again, this is the sankara, or the measurements, the judging. And so because we're judging ourselves against some kind of idea, it's not actually who we are. But who we are is always changing, is always developing. Yeah, Isabella.
The question that's slipped on my mind before about the sanity is I'm trying to understand it's difficult that maybe by training mindfulness or we learn to hear.
Yeah.
There's that mindfulness, the stream, underlying stream of memories of just my mind drifting. Is that kind of force? And we build it up until it can come to force with fear of losing the identity. It's quite a job being mindful for more than a second at a time.
Yeah.
Underestimating.
Yeah, I would just say.
1 minute.
Yeah, I would just say keep on coming back to the physical senses, and to just that continuity in the physical senses. You are here in the present. You can feel, you can see, you can taste, you can touch, and then you are here. And like whatever you think you are, whatever you have been, whatever you might be, that doesn't matter, because when you are here and present and grounded, everything that you ever were and everything that you ever will be falls away, and there is only what you are right now. And that process is inherently healing. To be in the present is to be healing.
Well, that's
If
frightening.
Sorry?
That's frightening.
It's frightening.
To stay.
You don't
Thought drifts
Yeah, you don't stay long in it, you just stay present in it. Yeah. As long as you're staying present, then your mind and your body are healing themselves. And you all of those problems are gradually dropping away. So just stay present as much as we can. Okay. Remember, the present is a gift. Go on.
I'm very surprised that bhikkhus and bhikkhunis would learn by heart the Abhidhamma. I thought that the suttas and the Vinaya were words of the Buddha directly spoken and then combined 200, I don't know, years later. The Abhidhamma was commentaries and much later. And I wonder why, if it's true, or if it's correct, and why bhikkhus would learn something else than the word of the Buddha, because was it not easy to understand and we need commentaries, and were the commentaries written by enlightened people? If we know.
So the question is about the Abhidhamma, and like why were people learning and studying Abhidhamma and so on? Well, it was a very different time, so I think it's really kind of hard to sort of judge and estimate exactly what people were doing. What we can say is that the Abhidhamma Pitaka, right, the canonical collection of Abhidhamma, is an oral literature. So it was created and passed down originally as an oral text, just like the suttas, and only later was written down. Later commentaries and treatises and so on were originally written literature. They were originally composed, like Mahayana Sutras are written literature. So Abhidhamma was an oral literature. So do we know that that's what people were learning? Yeah, sure we know. That's how it was made. So most of the Abhidhamma really consists of sort of summaries and catalogues and systematizations of the text, which would have been they would have acted as keys and mnemonic reminders for advanced students, so that you would always, your foundation of your education is always with the suttas, but then of course people are constantly asking questions about the suttas. So they'd be asking questions like, oh, it talks about this here and it talks about that there. Are they the same or different? Or how are they related? And so the Abhidhamma undertakes to give systematic answers to those kinds of questions. So usually it would have been advanced students who were then going on and studying those things. Make sense? Remember, like in those days, what you didn't have, you couldn't look stuff up at Wikipedia, you didn't have a dictionary, you didn't have an encyclopedia, right? So that was the only way you had to study things. Yeah.
So about Abhidhamma is coming later.
That's correct. Abhidhamma comes later. Yeah.
So do we really learn that over?
Do we need to learn the Abhidhamma? No.
Yes.
Learn it if you like, right? If you're interested in it. But yeah.
It can help. Or anything.
Sorry?
That's to understand.
Some people say it helps, yeah. I mean, I would say that to be honest, I said most of the things about the Abhidhamma that make it helpful are now out of date. Right? Basically, what the Abhidhamma did was to collate and systematize things, which was useful in days when you didn't have what we have today, like books and resources and so on and so forth. So most of those things actually not particularly useful these days. Also, just bear in mind that almost always what people mean when they say they're studying Abhidhamma has little to do with the actual canonical Abhidhamma texts. They're studying much later treatises and ideas.
Yeah, but to the perception, maybe because we live between the people, we need to have some judgments and make decisions. And Yeah, that's the point when the perception comes as
Right.
useful.
Right.
But going back to the feelings that we mentioned earlier, our feelings are also based on our perception because, yeah, let's say is the example, like you were not polite and my perception is that you are against me, but the truth is that you had bad breakfast, you didn't like your breakfast, that's all I have done.
Right.
But here comes my feelings that, okay, you are against me. So, and it happens all the time in our life.
Yeah.
Then, how to, or is there any way to understand or find out which our perception is helpful and which is not? How to find balance between this?
Yeah. Well, for a start, I mean, just simply to recognize that that is the case, right? That your perceptions don't necessarily correspond to reality, and so at least you know that, right? And then that allows you to get a bit of distance around it. Maybe you feel hurt, or maybe you feel judged, or maybe you feel something, and then you can just like warn yourself, oh, hang on, that's just a perception. Just be cautious about how you respond. And so you can always come back and like ask yourself, make sure that you're responding from kindness and so on. And then that also opens up a pathway to understanding if it's important, right? If it's just a very small thing, maybe it's not really important to do anything. If it's something that happens persistently, for example, then maybe you want to ask that person, oh, look, sorry, I can't help getting the feeling that, you don't like me or something like that, or what's going on. And then that's something that you can talk about. Yeah.
Can you very briefly just clarify feeling in the link here? Because it just feels like it's a bit redundant. Like if there's contact, then you just perceive that contact. What does it mean to feel the contact automatically?
What it means is the contact provokes something that you either like it or dislike it or don't care about.
But isn't the perceiving part the pre-cognitive stage?
Yeah, this is pre-cognitive. Yeah, feeling is like really fundamental.
So like even like I like, for example, like even at its most fundamental basic level, I like.
Yeah,
that's still a perception.
Think about it as think about it in terms of like biology, right? Let's say something like a tree. Does a tree have perceptions?
Yes.
Maybe it does because
maybe, but like if a tree feels that the sun is shining a certain way, then the tree kind of likes that and turns towards it, right? Kind of like a feeling, right? Or if you maybe burn a match or something like that, then plants will shrivel away from the intense heat or something like that. So like that level of feeling, that level of feeling can be responded at a very kind of basic level. It's very primeval. And perception is a bit more sophisticated than that. It sort of builds up on the feelings.
But perception here comes after perceive. So perceive itself should come before feel, because perceive is the mechanism that allows light to access light. And then once light access.
Hang on, sorry, I don't understand that at all.
So say now light from the sun.
No, I don't understand the bit you said before.
Okay, I just start from the beginning. So light hitting from the sun. Light from the sun.
Yeah.
Hits or rods or cones in our eyes.
Yeah.
That's perceived. That's
Okay.
what it is to perceive. And then from that, like we may feel.
No, you just swap the order around.
What's contact?
Okay, so so light from the sun hitting the cones.
Yeah.
That's contact.
Yeah.
Right?
And the consciousness of that, yeah.
And then, so what is perceived then is not perception? Because I thought perceived was the very rudimentary stage of that process of contact transduced into the perceptual system.
Maybe you're confusing like perceptions used sometimes in psychology as that way of like a sense perception, as in like the awareness through the senses, which in Buddhism would be vijnana or consciousness. And so perception is the conceptual processing. In Buddhism, perception is the conceptual processing or pre-conceptual processing of that experience. Right? You don't look entirely satisfied.
No, I'm not quite satisfied.
Okay. We might have to leave it there because I get the feeling that this could go round and round in circles for a long time. Why don't you just take it for contemplation, see how it goes, all right? We're not going to solve all of these problems right away. Okay?
So a quick clarification, is a perception also a construction?
What do you mean by construction?
In the sense that the I, the ego is a construction, or the past and the future are constructions. Is fundamental level of perception also, or is there a direct perception in Buddhism?
I suppose I just invited all of this on myself. I mean, it's a construction in the sense that it's something conditioned, right? It's not just something simple that just exists. It's a conditioned process. So it's construction in that sense, but it's not really a construction in the sense that I was using the word before, which is a construction is something that is constructed. So you construct the past, present, and future by making that thing that's there, whereas perception is like a process that interprets things.
Go around in circles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, again, that's why I was kind of felt painful trying to answer it. Yeah, it's not a construction in the sense that I was using the word construction before, if that's clear. Yeah.
So maybe.
Okay.
Do arahants still have feelings?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. They have
Of course. Do arahants have feelings? What do you think they are? Just unfeeling monsters?
Yeah.
Do you think that arahants are unfeeling monsters?
No, but they still have the like, dislike, and don't care.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Do arahants like things? Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, look, you just heard what Mahakacharya said about the Buddha, right? Sounds like he likes the Buddha. Yeah, who got it? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry to listen. I have a speech impediment, so I'm going to try and be clear.
Thank you.
Going back to the question, the president is a gift. There was a follow-up question, because I know languages which present is not a gift, is not synonym of a gift. And I wonder, did you have the same impression of the language we think in?
Yeah.
Modifies the perception of the thought.
Sure. Yeah.
And I myself speak or read many different languages. And I see that I don't think the same thought depending on the language I think in. Do you have the same perception about Pali? Because I know Pali and the Asian language. You have the same perception about Pali and English, or for example, do you have trouble thinking in English what you thought in Pali? I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. So the question was about whether the language that we're using shapes the perceptions of the way that we can frame ideas and so on. You know? I think it does, and it does to some extent. And I think we've already seen that in this particular passage where the Pali, which makes use of the Pali feature that it does not have to express the subject of the verb, but can leave the subject of the verb implicit. And I think that that's a very deliberately used and very meaningful aspect of this particular passage, which can't be literally translated into English. So that affects the meaning of it. But I also think that those things are relatively minor. Like I think most things can be translated reasonably well from one language to another. Of course, there's always a different feel, and there's always some things that can be said more clearly in one language than another. But I think generally speaking, experience shows that most of the time we can translate reasonably well. But that's like one of the beauties of having different languages, isn't it? That they open up different sets of connotations and different ideas and different images that are going to, you can have the same image that in English might be really sparkling and a really alive image, but then you translate it to another language, it's just a dead metaphor. And so, yeah, these are the concerns of poets. Translating poetry is very hard. I mentioned a couple of days ago about how the Vedic literature uses these kind of deliberate obscurities and plays with language in these highly sophisticated ways in order to hide things. And the Buddha usually doesn't do that. So this passage again by Mahakachana is a bit unusual in that respect. The Buddha's not usually so clever in the way that he uses language. He's more plain spoken. So this is kind of something of the personality of Mahakachana which is coming through. He liked playing with language in this way. Okay, I'm just going to. Oh no, we actually already read through here. Yeah, we read through here. Do we have any more questions before we wrap up for today? No? Just let me briefly kind of sum up. So what happened so far is Mahakachana. So the Buddha met with Dandapani. Dandapani seemingly had beef with the Buddha and tried translating that into whatever language that he speaks. He had beef with the Buddha. And the Buddha talked about non-conflict and about how perceptions don't underlie. And then he went back to the Sangha, repeated that to the community, and then they asked him for clarification. He gave a clarification passage, but it still needed further clarification. Then they went to Mahakachana, and then he explained it with this particular passage. Now, Mahakachana is not talking specifically about Dandapani. We've forgotten about him. Dandapani doesn't actually recur anywhere in the text at all. But if you think about it, then this is kind of referring back to that initial situation. So the person here is Dandapani himself, right? Who has become something that has existed and persists through the past, present, and future. So he has created his idea of who he is as a person based on sight seen by the eye, sounds heard by the ear, smells, taste, touches, body, and mind. And because of those things, has allowed those proliferations to go unchecked and has become a person, a constructed, stable self that persists through the past, present, and future. And so this, because of that, is not able to let go of that sense of aggrievement and that sense of anger at the Buddha. So this, again, I think is a really useful reflection for understanding meditation, for understanding the mind. I taught this sutta in a workshop on addiction also. And I think this sort of really relates to that idea of addiction, because one of the primary features of an addict is that they feel like they're the victim of their desires and their behaviors, like they have no agency over what they're doing. It just takes them over. And that kind of, this sort of kind of unwinding that process by which we become the victim of our experience, I think is really powerful. Thank you.
I don't quite understand the simile that the Venerable Mahajana has given to the medicants and about this looking for hardwood.
In the previous paragraph, yeah.
Yes, he described these medicants basically pass over the roots of trunks and imagine the hardwood to be sought in the branches and leaves. I'm not sure I understand correctly what he meant, because this medicant, they're just sitting there, and that would have described what he has heard from previous events. And before the medicant could actually react or even be able to ask a question, Buddha has come back to his dwelling. So, but this simile actually describes someone which I've seen in other suttas in search of hardwood, instead of going for the real hardwood, go for some other trees. I'm not sure if this simile actually describes exactly what a medicant has experienced. That's my impression. So what's your interpretation of this simile?
I don't know, I think it's pretty straightforward. They were with the Buddha, they didn't ask him any more questions. And then he went off, so they could have asked him more questions, or they could have waited till later, but they didn't, so they went to see Mahajana instead. And then he said, oh, it's like you're looking for the hardwood, which is the Buddha, but you came to the leaves instead. I'm not sure what you don't understand. It seems pretty simple for me.
You kind of pondered on what you said.
Yeah.
And later on, we realized we didn't really quite get what you said.
Yeah.
So we want to ask the question.
Yeah.
But what actually makes Mahajana almost like criticize medicants, not asking a question like immediately before Buddha left?
Or later. I mean, the Buddha didn't go forever, he just went to his hut for a while.
Well, yeah, well, I just found it very strange that is it?
Yeah, I mean, the point, I think you're making it more complicated than it needs to be. The point is that the Buddha's around, they could have asked the Buddha, but they didn't. They went to Avalokiteshvara instead. That's it.
Why do you think they do that?
May, who can say? Who can say? Yeah. Why not? Why wouldn't you? I don't know. People do all kinds of things. Go, oh, there's a monk over there. We'll go and ask him.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, there's nothing to be criticized about.
I don't think he's so much criticizing them. He's more just being humble and pointing out that the Buddha is the teacher.
Yeah, because you mentioned about pedagogy that the Buddha used, right? So it doesn't always point things out in the way he usually does.
Right.
And so in this case, he just left.
Yeah.
And the medicants were sitting there like, oh, I don't understand what you just said.
Right.
Let me just go find somebody who probably know better than I do.
Right.
Which is a very normal thing to do in the kind of learning environment. But it seems that it's not the kind of thing that Mahajana would see fit in the first sense. Perhaps it's in something humble, but maybe he's pointing out the better way to learn is to learn from the source. Instead of asking your classmates.
Maybe. Tell you what though, either way is better than asking ChatGPT. Definitely, we can definitely agree on that. Yeah. Okay. No? Okay. Sounds like a good question. Kaushal, did you have another question?
No, I was just comment like as a South Asian person in terms of South Asian.
Yeah.
So normally when we heard something very critical or very complicated thing from the teacher, we are not directly questioning hill. Sometimes we go to the and after. Maybe that's why. Just coming.
Okay, yeah.
Or maybe not.
But it's also like very cultural, like Mahakachan is different. I mean, he's just showing reference to the Buddha, that's all. And it's just like a game of politeness that they're playing, you know, not like really criticizing. It's just sorry, who are you? Got you with that one, didn't I? Yeah.
I see myself. What was the word underline? And the book comes like this, it says here, how the perceptions do not underlie the Buddha.
Yeah.
What does underline? I'm using the word.
Yeah, no, I understand, yeah. Like so for a start, the Pali word, it's a very literal translation of the Pali word. Right? So the Pali word is an osaya, which literally means to underlie something. So it's lying underneath you. Yeah. So the underlying tendencies or the anusayas are mental qualities that that exist as potentials to provoke responses. And we've got a list of them there, right? So it gives like the 7 anusayas. You have a list on the page. On the first page, right? Desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, desire to be reborn, and ignorance, right? So these are underlying impulses which may or may not be active, right? So you don't always have doubt in your mind, but the underlying tendency to doubt is always there. And when the conditions are right. So what that means, when we say the underlying tendency is there, you don't mean necessarily that there's something that exists that is an underlying tendency. What it means is that when the conditions are right, the doubt will arise. Yeah. And the same thing with those other ones. So something like say conceit, right? So conceit is always there, even though you don't necessarily feel conceited in every moment. But when the conditions are there, then the conceit will arise. That's what the underlying tendency means. Okay. Then I'm going to go to someone who hasn't asked questions, okay? Is that all right?
It's related to this list. Would you say repulsion is close to the will or hate?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, just another term. Same thing. Oh, thank you. That was a nice, easy one. That's great. Okay, have we got hopefully a more answerable one than the last one? Go on.
Yeah, and the response I'm looking for is just a yes or no.
Oh, thanks.
So I've been contemplating, reflecting on this for the past day or two, but also been coming up for me spontaneously over the past couple of years. So just is my view on it to some extent right. So what I intuitively felt was that, let's say, for example, heat, so the sun's rays, that's the contact. And the feeling is an experience. And when I experience the heat is perceiving. And then from perceiving heat, I think, oh, this is very hot. And then from thinking this is very hot, I
So you said the heat is perceiving. I'm not sure what you meant.
So in the perceived section there, right? You say you perceive, right? You feel, okay?
Yeah.
So the feel for from what I understood, or for what resonated with me, was feel is just experience. And then when you are to label,
feeling is just experience.
so
Is that what you're saying?
in the sense like experience.
Is that what you're saying? Feeling is just experience.
Feels like experience. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not quite hearing you correctly. Are you saying feeling is just experience or fear is just experience? Feeling.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just not hearing you correctly because of the sound, that's all. Okay. No, feeling is not just experience. Feeling is the pleasure, painful, or neutral tone of experience. Okay. Does that answer?
It kind of.
Okay. All right. I also didn't quite understand. You said heat is perception.
So I'm trying to bring like a real life experience into this sort of development. And see, where I'm kind of getting stuck. This is how I approached it, or this is how it came up for me. It's when a thought happens. They're saying, if I'm stuck in mental proliferation,
right?
I can identify this as a thought. Okay, but this came from a thought.
Sure.
And this thought came from me perceiving something, right? So,
sure.
And then from me perceiving it came from a certain feeling.
Yeah.
Right? So there's then in the process of this meditation, there's a deepening, there's a kind of a letting go of these more of the surface level experiences. Right. And you can really let go of whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
So I find it difficult to communicate clearly because it's something I'm still in the process of reflecting on.
Sure.
And because I asked for like a yes or no, it was more so to quote Aston Shah. It's like, am I going to when I'm walking down the road, am I?
If this is your idea of a yes or no question, I would hate to see a complicated, nuanced one. Again, I think that the things you're talking about are more things for reflection, right, than things that are going to be answered with a yes or a no. Yeah. So yeah, just a text. Don't. Be nice to the text. Like it's something that I see a lot again in the way that people handle scriptures and handle suttas and things like that, is that people put this kind of overbearing weight on them, where you have like a whole sort of metaphysical system or something like that, which is based on a reading of a particular text, usually of a translation of a text, usually of a not particularly good translation of a text, and then your whole metaphysic is based on it. And just like to have, like, I think it's really important to remember these are just words, and just to like hold them lightly and gracefully, and to listen to what they are saying rather than trying to sort of burden them with too much meaning. They do have a lot of meaning, it's true. And we just try to listen to how that meaning is speaking to us. And if the meaning is not speaking to us, it's all right. Because again, these are teachings that are given in a time and place to certain people for certain reasons. And we don't always have access to that context. We don't always know where those people were at. And we don't always know all of the connotations, everything that's around it. So, to when we take up suttas, or we take up scriptures in general, take it up with a sense of grace and a sense of gratitude and a sense of lightness about it that can help us start to reflect on it and learn from it. Allowing ourselves to appreciate it with a sense of wonder and a sense of playfulness. And these are things which help it to become alive and to really kind of mean something that's going to shift us. I think we should probably wrap up about that. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Marion's last one. Okay.
I don't understand the sentence. If they don't find anything worth approving, welcoming, or getting attached to in the source from which these arise, you said that the source is proliferation.
Proliferation, yeah, all the proliferating judgments, yeah.
Oh,
The judgments driven by proliferating perceptions are the source.
like the whole group is the source, and these arise are judgments. Like I just wanted to be sure that the source.
Yeah, you don't get attached to it. When you're sitting there, you're thinking about everything, you start judging yourself. I'm a bad person. So you don't approve, you don't get attached to those judgments.
Okay, so
Yeah, you can let go of those judgments.
Group of Papancha.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Okay.
So this is the basic idea. When you get beset by these things, you get beset by these judgments, you get beset by all of these things, you don't approve, welcome, and hold on to them. Yeah? You'll be mindful of them. It's just proliferation. And you let go. And once you do that, then you're starting to unwind the source, which is sealing everything. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Probably. It's just the
Does
grammar.
it make sense to you? No. It's tricky. It's a tricky passage. It's a tricky sutta.
Rocket science.
Sorry? It's rocket science. Yeah. All right. Okay. Let's finish by paying respects.